Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Tariff Clarifications Extended Day-Ahead Market and Day-Ahead Market Enhancements call. My name is Hannah Pearson, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Andrew Ulmer, Assistant General Counsel, John Anders, Deputy General Counsel, David Zotlo, Assistant General Counsel, and Milos Bosanak, Manager Policy Development. Next slide. Just some housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded for informational and conveniences purposes only. Any related transcript should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This collaborative meeting is intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. So please keep your comments professional and respectful. And please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so that we can manage time efficiently. Next slide. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right, and then you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon located on the bottom right of the participant panel. If you joined by audio only, please press *3 on your device. And then for everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking, and you can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists. Next slide. And then here's a look at the agenda. We'll start with a brief background, and then we will head into the draft tariff changes, discussion of stakeholder comments, and then we'll end with next steps. So with that, I'll pass it off to John. Or Andrew, I'm sorry.
Hi, Hannah. This is Andrew Ulmer with the California ISO. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, folks on the call. Again, my name is Andrew Ulmer. I work in the ISO's legal team. I'm here with some colleagues in one of our conference rooms who Hannah introduced, and we also have a couple of folks on the line. My colleague John Spomer, who works in our legal team, as well as James Lynn, who works in market services. Many of you are likely familiar with James. Today we wanted to have a conversation with you with respect to comments we received from some draft tariff revisions we published earlier this year, the beginning of last month, and which we received comments on. This is sort of a step along the way in our tariff stakeholder process. And these tariff revisions come out of our efforts to implement the day-ahead market enhancements and the extended day-ahead market framework as we go through the effort of designing specifications associated with the market design, on developing business procedures and practices. We do come across issues that we think give rise to clarifications that are necessary to, affect the successful launch of these initiatives. And that's the intent here. That's the purpose. We've also gone back to the tariff and found some inconsistencies that I think would benefit from correction. And so we're taking the opportunity to make those changes as well. In terms of today, what I think we have planned to do is walk through a document that we'll share for the call. And the document is essentially the same document we posted at the outset of this process, but it includes an additional column, which is a column reflecting comments we've received and a response to those comments. It is still a living document, and ultimately we will post it for stakeholder review. I think we're hoping to do that next week, but for today we're simply going to share it to hopefully facilitate understanding and some discussion of where we are and make sure that we are answering questions. Maybe we can shift to the next slide briefly before we start that process. And this is maybe a look ahead as to what to expect. I just mentioned our intention to share with stakeholders written responses to the comments we received, and we will do that. We also will likely post revisions to the draft revisions we shared in early November, in part based on the comments we received, and in part based on some additional thinking that has occurred during the month of November, especially with respect to discussions involving intertime modeling and also refinements to resource adequacy rules. We are planning this month to share a briefing with the Western Energy Market Governing Body and ISO Board on this effort to enhance their awareness and, create a little bit more visibility into the changes we're planning to make. And we'll then proceed through the month of December and early January to dot our I's, cross our T's, if you will. And if we see the need, I think we will hold a second call with stakeholders in January to resolve any outstanding questions or share any significant updates. And then finally, I think our target is to get this set of revisions filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the latter half of January. We want to make sure that we provide adequate time for these tariff revisions to be reviewed and accepted, we hope, by FERC well in advance of our planned go-live for the day-ahead market enhancements and the extended day-ahead market in 2026. So with that, maybe I will just sort of stop on this process and see if there are any foundational questions before we embark through the comments we've received. And Hannah, if there are any hands.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions and no hands raised.
Okay, we can come back to this process at the end as well if there are some questions about it. So for the next part of the discussion, I'm going to share a document. We may go off video here, but we can always come back if folks want to see us on the screen. So let me see. Okay, I'm the presenter.
Click it where the black about.
Yeah, holding that plus. Yep.
Okay, okay. Well, you may have us on video still, but
Will be.
perhaps that's a benefit. So again, this is a matrix. It looks a lot like the one we published in November, except that, like I mentioned, it has a fourth column. And what our plan today is to simply go through those entries in which we did receive comments and see if there are any outstanding questions. We've noted the commenter, and then we've added a short response. Again, we may be revising some of these responses as we go, but our plan is to ultimately post this for stakeholder review. But for today, you'll see the header. It's really just being shared for discussion purposes because it is a working draft. And maybe with that, we'll start with the first section, which is some revisions and clarifications to Section 11 involving charges for when imbalance reserve up awards are unavailable. And we've offered a change here, and we have a question from Edison and a short response.
Right. So this, starting with the first row, Section 11.2.1.8.1, that was dealing with the rescission for unavailable imbalance reserve awards. And so with the tariff that was filed initially, the concept of not considering the unavailable 5-minute imbalance reserve quantity, and that was to capture the overlap between imbalance reserves in the day ahead versus the flexible ramping product in the real time. And so there's a separate unavailability assessment for the FRP in real time. So to avoid that double penalty, we carved out the 5-minute portion that was in the tariff before. And so this change was only to kind of really just tweak the language there. I forgot what exactly the problem was. I think there was kind of an order of operations question about how we considered the 5-minute quantity and carving it out of the unavailable IRU amount. So this was just to make it more clear how we were going to apply the unavailable 5-minute quantity, how we were going to take that out of the unavailable IRU quantity. So that concept was not new, that was existing. It was just reordering the statements to make the process more accurate, make the tariff range more accurate in terms of how the rescission was supposed to work. And then if we scroll down, I think there was a similar comment for the next row. If you want to scroll down. Okay, there wasn't a comment there, but it's the same explanation for the next item in the row. It's probably the same question was there, but that's the answer. Should we go into the next one, the imbalance reserves, cost of reserve? I guess if there's anyone from SCE on the line who has further questions, we can pause for a moment and see if that addresses it. Otherwise, we will move on to the next.
Yeah, and I think maybe what we'll do is,
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I didn't see any hands raised or questions.
okay, we'll move through a batch of these and then pause and make sure that there aren't any questions. But if the moderator does see a hand come up, it's perfectly fine. Just interrupt us, and we will we'll take questions as they come.
Okay.
Okay. The next entry in which we received a comment was on an entry involving how we allocate the costs of imbalance reserves. And the change we made to section 11.219, 11.2.1.9 is really involving the allocation of these costs to holders of existing transmission contract or transmission ownership rights that have self-schedules. We did receive a comment from DWR, State Water Project, just asking about how our intent, I think, in terms of how we would apply these allocations. I'm not sure we totally synced up with the comment because, as I mentioned, the changes are really directed at, how much or to what extent that the holders of these contract rights or ownership rights face an allocation of imbalance reserve costs. And the idea being that if they remain, I think, within their self-schedules, they should not be exposed. But
right, the language we had filed initially, it referred to the tier 2 quantity, and so it was saying, scheduling within the balance portion was not subject to tier 2 allocation. The sort of assumption there is, well, if it's shielded from tier 2, then obviously it would also be shielded in tier 1. We didn't say that directly, and so the revision here was really just to be more clear, like, yes, it's exempt from both tier 1 and tier 2. Because that was the intent, basically. If you're within your TOR ETC rights, there's no allocation at all. And it was just revised to make that more, more clear. I mean, we were never intending not to exempt it, but it's just sort of being more precise there. And then so the specific question, as Andrew said, we weren't sure what was being asked. The allocation is on an hourly basis, neither monthly nor annual. We thought maybe there was some just confusion here between CRRs somehow, because that has a tier, a 3-tier process. So I don't know if there was just a misunderstanding about what this was referring to or not, but if, we can follow up with CDWR if they have further questions, or if anyone's on the line that doesn't address them. And while we're waiting for that to queue up, if they are, we can move on to the next item. Okay, so question from 6 cities, and these were the CRR revisions. It was to, recall there's been a lot of discussion over the last year or so on the congestion revenue allocation questions more generally, and then here we needed to add some specificity about how those changes would be reflected in the ISO CRR process, which is just an ISO process. It's not, part of the larger EDAM, but because, we have to talk about congestion revenue, and if it's going one place, it's not available to go to another place. And so here we were just making more clear that the congestion revenue collected on EDAM constraints, it stays with the EDAM balancing authority area for suballocation according to their tariff. And so the idea is some of that congestion revenue could be reflective of parallel flow from CRRs, or the modeled flow of CRR. So CRR within the CAISO BAA could have parallel flow on the EDAM BAA, and then so without a change to the tariff here, there would be an open question about whether that congestion revenue would be fed into the ISO CRR process to compensate CRR holders. And because of the other changes that were made earlier in the year, those funds are not kept by the ISO to further pass on to ISO market participants. So all this was saying is that any congestion on a non-ISO constraint is not fed into the CRR settlement process. So that's all these were meaning to be more clear about. And then, Andrew, if you could just scroll up a little bit to go back to show 6 of these questions. That particular, they were kind of asking why is it necessary to add a statement about setting hourly congestion fund to 0 if tariff also states CAISO only calculates an hourly fund for CAISO constraints. So the answer there is the part of the question says if the tariff also states. So it didn't state that before. I think you see that's a new edit. So I think in theory, yeah, you could just say one and not the other. It partly, belt and suspenders will just be abundantly clear. So kind of saying the same thing twice is just sometimes helpful. And then also beyond that, I think even saying the congestion fund collected on EDAM constraints is not part of the CR process, that still leaves open a question of how the ISO CRR settlement process will account for the fact the money isn't there. So you could say it's valued at a $0 amount, or you could do some kind of rescaling of the revenue just on the ISO constraints. There's some complicated approaches that you could, in theory, do that don't involve setting it to a $0 amount in the settlement process under the CRR1B rules. And so it was just also the reference to $0, just to be more precise here, that it's just treated as $0. We're not going to make any attempt to rescale the fund to account for just ISO constraints or anything more complicated than that. So it's just to be more abundantly clear of how it will flow into the CR settlement process.
Yeah, as David said, a belt and suspenders approach. And I'm just scrolling down to the next entry in which we received comments. And I'll pause here. We've left section 11, so I'll just also check to see if there are any hands or any questions at this point before we go to an entry that wasn't on our original matrix.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands and no questions in the chat.
Okay.
So this one, like Andrew just said, this is not on the matrix of revisions. There's a few of these that I think it was just SDE pointed out that there were other cleanup items that we hadn't noticed that they were suggesting that we should add. And I think at least on this one, 30.1.1, I think that was a fair point. We had, the existing tariff before the EDAM, lots of places would refer to bids for the particular products that are there. And so in some cases, we just added to the list to make sure it was inclusive of imbalanced reserves and the reliability capacity, which are new products. I think probably the better approach that we tried to take more often was just to say bids generally, just say, instead of trying to identify each of the products, just say bids. It's an all-encompassing term that covers bids for all of those things. And so that's what we would do. We would make that revision here to just say bids must be received by the market close and not try to add the list of bids for reg up, reg down, spending reserves, energy, reliability capacity amount. It's all encompassing. We don't need to add all those extra words. Okay, and then 30.5.8.2, another, I think, cleanup item that is not, now that I think about it, I don't think this is really even specific to EDAM. I think you know, it's a fair comment. This section suggests that demand bids and virtual bids are submitted in the real-time market, which they're not. That was existing language, so I think that was just sort of in line with the comment I just said, where you kind of try to list all the types of bids, and then you add some things that aren't really appropriate. So, you know, in any case, it's not really specific to EDAM, but I think that's a fair cleanup that, you know, we can make while we're at it.
Okay, we're moving into section 31, and we had some changes with respect to reliability capacity upbidding requirements, and part of those changes, we had some comments with respect to eligible intermittent resources or non-eligible intermittent resources, as well as whether or not the statements extend to eligible intermittent resources that are only submitting self-schedules.
Yeah, and again, I think both of these comments were, actually weren't really referencing the incremental edits we made to this section, but I think they were, both of SE's comments were fair comments. So you see, we were going into 31.5.1.2 to make a cleanup in terms of RMR. Comments from SE aren't really related to the RMR material, but nevertheless, I think they were, you know, we made two incremental edits here based on the comments. You see, we added the word economic to specify that the idea that if you're not submitting an economic energy bid in day ahead, then there's no RUC, generally no RUC obligation to bid. And then there's a question about EIRs. You know, I think the answer, as you see there, is the statement is meant to be applicable to all eligible intermittent resources, but it was referencing a forecast requirement in the real-time market, and obviously we couldn't, it doesn't make sense, really, that there would be a reference to the real-time market forecast, you know, that's part of an input to the day-ahead process. So there's a more applicable reference in 4.8.2.1 to the EIR forecast that is meant to be the input to applying this rule. Okay, you see we have a hand raised from a representative from SDE.
Yeah, we can pause and take a question if there is one.
Yep, we do have a hand raised from Adora.
Adora, you may need to unmute.
She's not connected to audio.
Oh, okay. I can message her in the chat for them, sorry.
Okay. Well, we can keep going and we can pause once we connect. Yeah, just checking to see if there's any luck.
No, I'm not seeing it. It looks like they might be on two different devices. So, oh, perfect. Okay. I believe that one is connected to audio. Adora, if you're able to speak. Oh, nope, we lost you.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, perfect. Oh, sorry. They did write it in the chat. Thank you. Still unclear as to whether all EIRs must bid for RCU and not just the EIRs that submit economic bids.
Right, and the response there is that it's applicable to all EIRs. The bidding up to the forecasted amount
So
would apply irrespective of the economic.
For eligible intermittent resources, right, we do calculate an upper economic forecast or upper economic limit. That happens in the real-time market, but if there is a production forecast that the EIR is using in the day-ahead time frame, then I think our expectation is that they would submit a RUC availability bid as well.
Correct. Another hand. So.
Okay. Dora, your hand is raised, and it looks like they are connected to audio, so let's try this again.
Okay, hello, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
perfect, thank you.
Okay, so can you just explain the rationale as to why renewable resources, whether they self-schedule or not, must submit RCU, but every other technology type is only, has a must-off for an RCU only for the economic bid range?
Well, in the day ahead, aren't they dispatched to the forecast? Are they submitting economic, self-schedules in the day ahead?
Yeah, that's a good
Renewables
question.
can submit economic bids in the day ahead, yes, they can.
No, but the self-schedule, I mean, I think the concept is that they're gonna be generally dispatched to the forecast, and so the RCU would be, bidding would match the forecast. That's just sort of part of the EIR approach, is how I was understanding it.
Yeah, so anything that gets an RCU award now has an obligation to submit an economic bid in the real time. So if a resource is not submitting economic bids in the day ahead, presumably it cannot or would not want to submit economic bids in the real time. So it seems like you make the correction for all other technologies, because if they're self-scheduling in the day ahead, presumably they cannot, for whatever reason, submit economic bids in the real time. So why does that logic not extend also to renewable resources? Why is it different for the EIRs?
Yeah, it's a fair question. We will take it and commit to go talk with both our forecasting team and market design team and run it to ground and also follow up.
Awesome, thank you. Just because it's a different, you're applying it differently to one technology type, just trying to understand what the rationale is and why it should be that way. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for persevering and getting through to us. So.
I made it through.
Okay. Going forward into section 33, which is, as folks are aware, the extended day-ahead market. Just moving to our first comment, which I think takes us a while.
I'll pause for a moment. Just noting, shaded in blue, some additional edits, unprompted, but, capitalization of some defined tariff terms that were previously uncapitalized. Nothing big. You can keep going.
So we had some additions to section 33.23 and received a comment on these changes. The changes actually appear on the next page, so I'll just scroll down to them. But they're largely intended to address a situation in which a transmission customer for an EDAM entity is unable to secure sufficient firm transmission to meet its market award and dispatch, and what type of optionality we are trying to, I suppose, include in the tariff for that situation between an EDAM transmission provider and its transmission customer. And the revision seeks to make clear that situations could arise where the transmission customer may not be able to secure adequate firm transmission from the EDAM transmission service provider to meet its market award. And so we're offering some flexibility to the EDAM transmission service provider to make adjustments to the charge it imposes on its transmission customer. But we did get a comment from WPTF, and John, if you want to talk about that. Okay. So the language that we put in, WPTF raises a concern that it might be overly broad. But, you know, I think our view is that the transmission service provider ought to, you know, be able to develop an approach that addresses this situation and make adjustments. And, you know, we are certainly open to, you know, additional feedback in terms of how this gets implemented, but I think we see it getting implemented primarily under the EDAM transmission service provider's OAT.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew, and I would just add that I think in situations where you know, the customer seeks to fulfill the requirements of the tariff and procure the firm transmission, but it's simply unavailable, and that in that circumstance, we felt that this, you know, some room for the transmission service provider to provide an adjustment to what otherwise would be the daily or hourly firm transmission service charge was reasonable, whereas the base case, which was what was previously addressed, is where somebody essentially, there's firm transmission service available, but they simply bid and get awarded, and you know, rather than procuring the firm transmission service charge, you know, that was the incentive was to procure the firm transmission service, and so we think that this balances those two out and is appropriate clarification of how this mechanically should work as it cascades all the way down through the transmission service provider's tariff.
And then we had some clarifications from 6 cities. I think we incorporated those. And then a further comment from Southern California Edison. And certainly, you know, to the extent there are conversations about how this would get implemented, as a market operator, we're, you know, more than happy to engage. Okay, in section 3330.8.3, there were some changes we submitted with respect to really more changes of form to make it clear that we're dealing with tags associated with scheduling coordinators within the ISO BA, and that that the section really only refers to EDAM entity scheduling coordinators. So we had a question about process with respect to sharing information with scheduling coordinators in the ISO BAA, and I think specifically a question about, will the ISO be sharing information with a scheduling coordinator that has not, if you will, completed its tagging requirements? And I think, you know, our ability to share information market-wide is one thing, to the extent that we have, you know, insufficient resources. We don't have the tags necessary to meet, you know, the requirements under, say, the resource efficiency evaluation. But I'm not sure we have the mechanism set up to have, if you will, scheduling coordinator-specific notifications deployed. And you know, I think our thought is that, you know, pursuant to kind of existing responsibilities under Section 4 of the ISO tariff, that scheduling coordinators, you know, they'll be responsible for completing their e-tags and ensuring they get submitted. through the rest of 33. Let me pause to see if we have any hands before we leave section 33.
Yep, we do have a hand raised from Alan.
Great.
Hi, Alan Meck, PG&E. I'm sorry, can you reiterate that response to the comment again? It sounds like you're saying that Six Cities' concern is just misplaced and that this is a BAA level failure, and so CAISO's not going to be notifying scheduling coordinators of a failure.
Yeah, I think the question we got from Six Cities, I don't think we've restated it here in its entirety, is, whether or not there'd be some mechanism to ensure that, we could reach out to scheduling coordinators with a schedule, a market schedule, that had not, for some reason, had a incomplete tagging associated with that market schedule. And, part of this is to, I think, ensure that, the BA passes the resource efficiency evaluation. I don't think we have a mechanism yet that would do that. We may have a mechanism to notify the market that we have insufficient schedules to meet the resource efficiency evaluation. But our thinking is that, it remains the scheduling coordinator's responsibility to manage the E-tags required under the WEC tagging rules at this point. So we don't have a mechanism to say, to chase down a scheduling coordinator with a market award to ensure that, they complete their tagging requirements. Does that make sense, Alan?
I guess so. It's just, being a CAISO participant, it's a little bit disconcerting because I don't want to see us put in a position where I would be upset if we suffered RSE failure penalties and PG&E gets hit with those charges because, let's just say, someone in the Six Cities, failed to submit an E-tag, and vice versa. I'm sure that someone in the Six Cities would be upset if they got hit with an RSE failure surcharge because someone at PG&E failed to submit their E-tags. And I just want to be sure that we're able to, if someone does trip up, is there a fail-safe device or is it just up to the scheduling coordinator? Will the scheduling coordinator just know in the event of an E-tag failure?
It's a fair observation. I think maybe it's one we can take back and talk to our own, our interchange desk about, as well as our implementation team, to at least raise the concern and suggest sort of what are the options potentially on the table. It does go beyond, I think, a little bit of the scope of what we can talk about today, but I hear what you're saying and your perspective.
I guess the question is just how do we know if there has been an E-tagging failure? Would the scheduling coordinator know?
Yeah. Right. Well, presumably the scheduling coordinator will know if it hasn't completed its tagging process.
Okay.
Yeah. They should be able to confirm that their tags have cleared.
Okay. Thank you.
But we'll still take it back. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. We do have another question from Margaret, a hand raised.
For Six Cities. Can you hear me okay?
I guess we can.
Okay,
please go ahead.
Just one clarification on this item, and I think it may go to Alan's point as well, but I see in your response that you've noted here that there will be further details provided in an ISO BAA supplement to the EDAM BPM. Are you thinking that BPM language would address the notification concern that I think we were flagging and that Alan was also highlighting?
Yeah, I mean, a question would be sort of, are we able to come up with a means of coordinating directly with a scheduling coordinator that's got an award and hasn't completed its tagging process versus a mechanism to at least alert, the market generally. And I don't know the answer to that at this point.
Okay, all right, but it's an open point for potential discussion in this BPM process.
Yeah, I think so, and, you know, again, I think that's our expectation, that it would probably be more in the space of the BPM than the tariff or in some kind of procedure. But that, I think, is, you know, something to determine still, and probably worth some additional exploration on our side, again, with our interchange folks,
Okay.
as well as our implementation team.
All right, thanks a lot. That's really helpful.
Okay, I saw, I think, another hand as well.
Yeah, I did, but I think they put their hand down, so we can always come back to it if you raise your hand again.
Okay.
Andrew?
Yes.
It's James.
Okay.
Yeah. So partially in the answer to this question, when we do the supplemental document, we'll give more details as to how we will inform you as to whether or not the tags were cleared after 3 hours of the day ahead market closing. But ultimately in ADS, you will get a notification on whether or not your day ahead or half schedule, in essence, has been awarded. You're gonna have to make a determination if it's accepted, partially accepted, and so on. So as part of the, at least as a backup, ADS should inform you as to whether or not your tag has cleared in the market.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. We have the hand raised again from Dan.
Great.
Yeah, Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. I didn't catch this when reviewing, so I didn't put a comment in on it, but the part that's just obscured, I think it's 33.13 and 2. It's the part on the notification timeline where you deleted the prior to 9 a.m.
Sorry, I went past.
Yeah. So I kind of understand why CAISO might want to remove the prior to 9 a.m. from the tariff and put it in the business practice manual, but from a scheduling coordinator perspective, we've submitted comments in the Pacific Core business practices and kind of throughout in various places that it's pretty critical that entities know what the constraints are going to be prior to getting their bids in and positioning themselves for the day ahead market run. And if that 9 a.m. to 9:15 window is pretty important for scheduling coordinators, that's kind of like, it's the last opportunity to adjust things. And if that EDAM transfer constraint gets put in at 9:45, it's not really an opportunity to make any business decisions, in response to that. So it feels like to me there should be some like standard set for putting those in before 9 a.m. or even earlier, and maybe an exception for reliability purposes or something, but that we should be setting the expectation that the model that entities are looking at prior to submitting their bids is not going to change right before the market runs.
Yeah. No, I hear that perspective. I'll be an apologist for this tariff section first and then try to respond. But I think our thought was that given that we were referencing already timelines and procedures in the BPM, that putting in a specific time in the tariff wasn't necessarily useful. But I now hear what you're saying, and certainly getting some clarity on this and precision. I guess the question we'd have is, can such a rule be memorialized in a business practice manual, or an expectation be memorialized in a business practice manual? I think our thought was that it could, but we'll take this back and certainly talk about it. It sounds like it's a matter that not just addresses the ISO as the market operator, but each EDAM entity as well. So we may want to surface it for a little bit more input
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, you know, the timeline for submitting your tags that we were just talking about on the back end of the day-ahead market run, you know, it can be somewhat arbitrary and can adjust based on when the, you know, when the ISO is able to publish the results. But this one really does impact the information that entities have to set up their day-ahead position. And given that the RSE deadline is there in the tariff, it kind of makes sense to have a time in place for this one, at least to me.
Yeah. No, that's fair, and we'll take that into consideration. Certainly, as written, it doesn't specify an exact time, just prior to 9 a.m. So.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll move us forward to section 34, the hour-ahead scheduling process. So we proposed to add some language here that, you know, the purpose of which was really just to talk a little bit about, you know, how we are modeling system resources and economic transfers in HASP, and create some clarity in this section. The language specifically states that during the HASP optimization, the market will ignore transfers between BAs in the EDAM area and BAs in the EIM area, and that after the HASP, hourly intertie schedules in the 15-minute market and the real-time dispatch will not be optimized, and EIM transfers will be optimized. So it's really kind of more of an order of show, I think, more than anything. We did get a comment, though, and a concern expressed by WPTF that what's being proposed may, you know, create some anomalous outcomes, and may create a priority of sorts for one type of transaction over another. I'm not sure we agree with this, but we're still talking about it with our market design folks and our implementation folks. So, you know, at this point, I'd say our answer is kind of we're going to evaluate this comment and the need for the additional tariff revision, but we will definitely take it up and provide a written response that addresses it directly.
Thank you. We do have a hand raised from Kathleen.
Great.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, David. It's Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Thanks so much for going through this. It's a lot to process. Appreciate the time. I just, maybe a process question just to remind myself. It's a little out of scope of like a tariff clarification to like raise your hand and be like feeling a little discomfort around this particular clarification from a policy perspective. And so like, and we didn't submit comments, but I mostly wanted to ask on this call, like, echo that I have similar just heartburn around that. I have a reliability concerns more than anything, and it just I don't think we've had a great enough time to like talk through it publicly. But my process question is more like, how do you do you feel like that it's clearly logged, that it's multiple people with this concern? Do I need to put something in writing? Are we gonna have those conversations about like the thing that jumps out at me honestly is the words that say that we're not gonna allow for like dynamic intertie resources to be able to help us meet our 15-minute market. And like, as you all know, operators still use load adjustments to try to incentivize that incremental supply. And I haven't had the opportunity to hear from the CAISO team about if that need is no longer there. And so I wasn't sure what your suggestion would be. If you feel like this is sufficient, if you think that you want to see us submit something in writing in another way, I just would appreciate some advice.
Yeah, no. I mean, questions are always good ones. We're taking notes and trying to capture them. So I'm not sure this is language saying that we won't rely on dynamic schedules at interties.
Okay.
But you know, certainly, you know, we will talk about your question, as well as the question WPTF submitted with our design team, and make sure that we are not inadvertently creating, you know, an ambiguity in the tariff in terms of how HASP will work. I mean, as you know, and many others know, HASP is it's a special run of the 15-minute market, but it really is, you know, being run well in advance of you know, the market run for EIM transfers. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate that. And perhaps it's the addition of language that seems to control 15-minute market in a HASP section that's causing me some confusion, maybe just flagging that as well. Thank you.
Right, okay.
Appreciate it.
Dan, I think I saw your hand.
Dan from TA. So kind of similar to Kathleen's comments. Yeah, this section around the HASP optimization, I think sections we have coming up around the SP type changes that were being considered and are changing again. There's aspects of that feel like we're kind of working through a quasi policy process through the implementation meetings and determining what's appropriate for and feasible for EDAM year one versus things that may or maybe were considered as the right answer for a future more comprehensive EDAM footprint. And so I don't really know where to go with kind of assessing, like, are some of these changes, do they fit within what's already been approved by the board as a sort of space where CAISO can make these tariff clarifications, or where do we as a stakeholder community kind of weigh in to say, no, we don't think that these are just clarifications. We think they're pretty big changes in what we are expecting for implementation policy, and want to continue to have more discussion. So that's kind of an overarching thing. And then just specifically on the HASP optimization, the sentence above the blue changes, are we picking up the fact that HASP settlement prices do matter when we're in scarcity conditions and when BCR is given to HASP schedules that end up settling lower than what they were committed at during the advisory run? Does that need to be accounted for at some point in here?
I'm not sure. I mean, I understand the question, I think, but I'm not sure I understand precisely what you mean by accounted for. So
there's kind of this, and it's hard to show it all on one screen, but there's the section around kind of the influence of in the way that it's being suggested to change the HASP clearing, the comments that WPTF made. Some of the response to that has been, well, HASP prices are advisory and they don't really matter as much as the eventual FMM and RTD prices, but that statement would kind of not reflect that they do matter, and HASP prices do matter in some instances because of that BCR allowance.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of just, if we're going to do things to change the HASP optimization, I want to make sure that we're not forgetting the fact that the commitment for intertie schedules in the HASP run does matter for pricing and unit commitment, but that's kind of a bigger policy discussion, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, fair point. We'll capture that and bring that back as part of this conversation.
Thanks.
Yeah, and in response to kind of the more global point, and I know the Energy Authority raised some of these concerns in its written comments, especially with respect to some of the resource adequacy requirements, intertie rule changes. I mean, we're aware of that observation. We're sharing that internally. definitely taking it under consideration. We do expect, and we'll go over this again at the end, to have more process and opportunities for stakeholders to, you know, provide their thoughts. I think our thinking currently is that, you know, the scope of the changes we're looking to make is consistent with authorizations we received to make the tariff changes we made for the day-ahead market enhancements, for the extended day-ahead market, and sort of it's a balance between trying to ensure we stay true to that authorization, but also that we are implementing something that, you know, is manageable, not just by the ISO and EDAM entities, but by market participants as well. At the moment, I think we, you know, feel as if we're in the space of that authorization. But I understand that, you know, a lot of concern has been expressed that, you know, perhaps we're talking about market policy. We certainly, you know, are at least sensitive to that in the sense that it touches a rate of service, and as a result needs some clarification in our transmission tariff. So. I'm going to continue, and I think maybe there's one comment in section 40 related to resource adequacy requirements for submitting RUC availability bids.
And yeah, so again, the answer to the question is yes. It was only a reference to the economic bid range. So, okay, I think I see you had it correct.
We do have a hand raised from Kathleen.
Great. Kathleen?
Great, thank you. And if this is better taken off with the technical or kind of outside this call, please let me know. But Kathleen Distra, the conversations about like the I think that last question was also about RUC availability, the RUC bids, and then how they transition into MU. I was just curious, is there anyone who could clarify for me, like if I'm a market participant and I submit a self-schedule into the IFM, that gets in, and then there's a RUC bid and you receive an RCU, let's say up award, and in real time try to submit the self-schedule again, like what happens?
I'm sorry, the scenario is Kathleen, the scenario is you submitted self-schedule for energy and day ahead.
Yeah.
How did you, and you didn't submit an RCU bid?
No, I'm saying you have to, right? So if you bid into IFM, whether self-schedule or economic, you have to submit an RCU. And if you're RA, you have to submit an RCU. And I can meet my generic RA with a I can meet my generic RA with a self-schedule, right? And then I have to submit an RCU bid with that. And let's assume I just submit 0 because I'm, you know, RA in it. And then I go into my real time and I, again, normally would submit my let's say self-schedule into real time. I'm just curious, does Cyber reject it, or is it subject to a penalty? I missed this piece of the rules, David. I didn't. I'd appreciate clarity.
Oh, okay.
We may need to take that question and run it through our scheduling business rules team.
Okay. That would be great. I'm not sure where it is in the clarifications or the original language, so I appreciate the extra time and effort.
So I can provide a little bit of an answer to that, Kathleen. So if you don't submit, if you don't submit a bid equal to your energy plus your RUC bid, we're still going to accept it. You're just going to get no pay for the RUC availability. So that no pay basically means you're not, you know, that we're taking all that back.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
That's the settlement rule and maybe the scheduling rule as well. So, thank you, James.
Thank you.
Okay. So we included language that we posted in November on both intertie scheduling as well as concept of resource adequacy reassignment for system resources providing RA at, I think, EDAM transfer locations. There have been more stakeholder discussions since we posted this language, and we'll be returning to it. What we wanted to do today, I think, was to frame where we are and perhaps what you can expect with respect to seeing additional proposed language to address sort of the status of those discussions that have occurred during the month of November.
Yeah, so just briefly, and if you scroll down a little bit, so that you
Yes.
can hopefully see the full response. So yeah, in summary here, for the RA reassignment, what the, we had proposed doing the reassignment, basically all forms of system resources providing RA would have to reassign to physical resources on different timelines depending on where it was sourced, and there was a lot of rules we had proposed in that regard. What the approach now is, we've kind of pulled that back. This concept of reassignment would only apply to system resources sourced from an EDAM BAA. So in the day ahead, those would have to be reassigned from the system resource to a physical EDAM resource. So just for the system resources sourced from EDAM, everything else will effectively be status quo in terms of how it provides RA and then how it's bidding, et cetera. And then so in terms of the EDAM, one change from what was posted, basically the rules that we posted before for EDAM are the same, except that the reassignment must happen in the day ahead versus that being optional, and then it's only being obligatory in real time. And that goes to the system resource now will be shown as an SP tie in all cases, a schedule endpoint tie combination, whereas what we had posted for review initially was where those system resources would be defined by I think it was a G gap and a tie combo is what we had posted on the version that of the tariff that was seen before. So a couple of changes there, but yeah, most notably the reassignment will only apply if the system resources sourced from the EDAM BAA, otherwise status quo on the RA processes. And then again, just as a review of where this was coming from, the idea of the reassignment was there's, bidding rules in the EDAM about bidding physical resources in the day ahead. How do you harmonize that with the approach of allowing system resources to provide RA capacity? All of this reassignment was kind of driven by a question of how to make those two things fit. And the note here is saying, it would be, the one alternative instead of pursuing the reassignment would have been to just effectively make system resources no longer eligible to provide RA capacity, and that wasn't really an approach that we thought was, that would have been a more significant change in this implementation process. That is not something that seems appropriate to pursue. So the alternative is then to have this reassignment approach, which is effectively like outage substitution. I mean, it's on a different timeline. It's not for outages, but it's effectively substituting one resource for another in terms of providing, meeting the RA obligation. So that's what the new version will show that we'll post soon. And then pivoting to some of the intertie bidding material in Appendix C as well, we've had some calls with stakeholders already to clarify or identify how we plan to move forward on the intertie bidding. We'll also have some further edits in Appendix C to match that, where again, we'll have the D-gap tie combo and pricing, EDAM transactions, everything else will remain SP tie. So there's some language in Appendix C we have to tweak, relative to what was posted before and also relative to how it exists pre-EDAM. So it's just getting the details right there, but I think the basic approach has been shared already, conceptually, and then just making sure, because this is, Appendix C is kind of a pretty dense set of material. So we gotta be careful we're saying everything correctly. Always need to be careful about that, but I think with Appendix C, that's a harder task than maybe in some other areas, so.
Yeah, so to just, to recap for intertime modeling, and when we do get this language out, the things to look at is us preserving the scheduling point intertie concept, largely for the ISO boundary, but also having the concept of a default generator aggregation point for schedules at the boundary of an EDAM area, which is similar, comparable even to today. We have that concept for schedules at the boundary of an EIM entity and the EIM entity area. And then for RA, again, as David mentioned, sort of really two changes, I think, really scaling back its application so that it extends solely to system resources that are being sourced from an EDAM area to provide RA capacity and scheduler RA capacity using intertie capacity, which is also an EDAM transfer location. And then the reassignment rules would attach not before real time, but before day-ahead clearing. We'll stop there.
We do have,
Is there any questions?
yeah, we have two hands raised. We can start with Dan, and then we'll go to Eric.
Yeah, Dan from TA again. So a couple thoughts and comments here. One, just to kind of close the loop on the policy changes versus clarifications. Like, this is another area here in the RA bulk changes is similar to that HAPS change you're talking about, where obviously CAISO is working hard to make the changes that you feel are necessary, and we support that effort. We want the market to to go live on the best footing as possible. But we also want to make sure that we understand kind of why the decisions are being made and sort of what the rationale is behind them, and then have the opportunity to provide the feedback that we as scheduling coordinators feel is necessary to provide. So kind of you all get a rounded perspective on how these changes might influence things, and that opportunity is always there in a policy process. And I feel like your staff is doing a ton of outreach right now and working through these implementation meetings to engage a lot with stakeholders, and we appreciate that. And it's I think it's producing a lot of good dialogue and a lot of maybe good directions for where these policies are headed. But these two areas, the RA and the HAPS clearing, feel like they both need a lot more effort to get to something where we've really thought through every implication of the changes. And so the question is there a way for CAISO to move forward with the other tariff changes that feel like they're sort of universally supported at this point, and get those locked down so that there's sort of less open items carrying forward into January and February timeframe, and let us kind of focus on continuing to work together to come up with the right answer in these RA and kind of intertie scheduling spaces, or sort of how have you looked at kind of locking down some areas while we focus on others, and I don't know, pros and cons of that.
Yeah, no, fair question. I mean, in sort of even in our policy processes and our tariff development processes, it's always an option to the extent things are practically severable from one another, to move forward with some aspects of a proposal or an element of a proposal, and not other elements of a proposal. Sometimes that's not possible because they are inextricably linked and non-severable, but that's certainly a perspective we can take back and talk about internally.
Yeah, I'm maybe less concerned about the sort of what what FERC would do with them. I feel like if these are the changes that we discussed in the first part of this call, if they're sort of universally supported and non-controversial, and there's probably limited chance that there's going to be any reason to reject them. And I guess, there's an aspect of filing them severably so you can move forward with those changes regardless. But it's sort of just, is it worth it to make an early filing on the stuff that we know that works just to get that locked down? But specifically on these RA changes, am I correct that we have to make some change because what's in the tariff now has been determined to be like, we can't go live with what's in there now, so it's a choice of what do we do with changes from here? Like, there is no status quo that just can move forward out of this.
I think, go ahead, John.
No, everybody, Dan, this is John Anders, everybody's like, has something to say about this, so I'll let each of us, say what their perspective is. But, from my side, we do have the approved changes, in the tariff, subject only to, an informational filing that the ISO would make to make them effective. And those changes, at least in our view, and, there could be further discussions and debate about it, supported the initial intertime modeling approach that was sort of, I would say, resoundingly resisted by stakeholders, and we heard that. And so we're now in the space of making adjustments to that. But the only rules we have on file that have been accepted are the initial set of rules changes to Appendix C, albeit without the corresponding RA changes necessary to facilitate or support that. But so that's where we are, and that's a May 1 timeline. So we're doing our best here to find a place where stakeholders are comfortable, and then make the corresponding adjustments into what's already in the tariff and already been accepted by FERC. So.
I think John's right. I mean, obviously with the RA requirements, we're looking at a means to affect the ability of system resources to continue to use intertie capacity at an intertie boundary that's also an EDAM transfer location. These rules facilitate that outcome.
Yeah, that helps, because I think the Appendix C stuff was just the kind of, that's where the gap tie aspects originated. So we'd have to change that to move it back to the SP tie pricing, and then the RA changes are really specific to either RA resources that are, in this instance, just on Pacific Core system and would be using a Pacific Core to CAISO interface point to deliver to CAISO. We're trying to clear up the ability to do that. And I think the reflection there is just that when we thought that the only interface point was going to be at Craigview between Pac West and CAISO up in the northern part of the system, and that's a entry point to the ISO that I think is doesn't have a whole bunch of extra capacity, so it's probably not a strong RA import. The one implication small, but with the recent discussion of the Mona intertie becoming an EDAM for point, that does definitely expand the concern around RA imports and getting this policy right for it. And the thing we're going to be looking for is just how we sync up between the ability to schedule into an EDAM area, wheel through it, and then hit the CAISO system, deliver import RA, and what the pricing implications are of having a gap tie methodology for those EDAM areas. when having the need to wheel through to deliver import RA, and just sort of how some of those pieces fit together. So yeah, just looking forward to continuing the conversation. Really appreciate all the work that's going into this, and this is helping me understand at least better how to engage going forward and how to think about the changes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and appreciate that, Dan. Just circling back, that the gap tie approach that, you just described in terms of the context of the Mona intertie, that is the concept, at least, that was accepted by, FERC, and we were working through. So we now have an opportunity to work with stakeholders. So I kind of look at it that way, rather than, a problem. So we're, if that helps at all, I don't know, but.
Yeah, agreed. And again, it's like a lot of the work that we did on EDAM in like 2021 to 2023 was thinking about a large cohesive footprint to start. And to me, these are now just kind of solving some of the issues of the way that implementation is going to go with starting with PAC and then adding PGE and then adding the other California BAs, that sort of the impact to the intertie market is evolving as the market footprint evolves. And so it's kind of a question of what makes sense for May 1st, 26 versus May 1st, 28. And that's what I hope we can keep talking about over the next couple of weeks.
Yep, thank you. Helpful perspective. Was there another hand? I think, Hannah, you mentioned Eric.
We have one more hand raised from Eric.
Hi, this is
talking. Oh, perfect. There we go.
Oh, perfect. Sorry about that. Hi, Eric Lopez, Southern California Edison. Just wanted to confirm, does that reassignment deadline still, is it still a 9 a.m. deadline?
For day-ahead reassignment, yes.
Yeah, and it would, I think what you saw in the draft tariff, what would remain is the idea of that's not a tariff-defined thing. We'll leave it in the BPM. So if we have to adjust the deadline, if there's a reason to make it later, we can facilitate that, or it needs to be earlier, whatever. But yeah, 9 a.m. is what it would, the intent is to have it be.
Yeah, and this is, I'll just add that practically speaking, where that comes into play is if, you don't know what your resource is, at the time that you're making that showing. If you know at the time you're making the monthly showing or so that it's a particular resource within Pacific Coast area, then the reassignment really doesn't come into play. You're bidding out that physical resource that's in Pacific Coast area. So this is really for those resources where you may have purchased something where you don't know where it's coming from any single day.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that. I know that there are times during sort of pathing when our upstreams, may not get us the generator specific information prior to that 9 a.m. deadline.
Okay.
There could be situations where that might occur.
Yeah.
We do have another hand raised from Mohan.
With CWR. And then thank you for the
Hello.
clarification. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the clarification on some of the questions we posted as comments, and I think these are very helpful. If I understand correctly, for the RA import from EWIM area, status quo will be maintained, and only for the EDAM BA with the RA import from EDAM BA, this change will happen, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So another question is, as you said, that reassignment must be done before day-ahead market by 9 a.m. Can we do reassignment with different resources on a daily basis, or the reassignment resource has to be the same?
you can reassign to different resources every day and even different resources each hour of the day. So you have the flexibility to specify the resources that you reassign the array obligation, even hourly. Now, to facilitate the specification, if your reassignment is static for many days or for the entire month, once you make the reassignment for the first time and you don't change it, it is persistent in the system, so you don't have to repeat it the next day until you actually need to change it. Okay?
Okay. And if there are multiple resources for the reassignment, and the RAM will be calculated by the resource, right?
Correct. Once the reassignment is in place, the array obligation is transferred for the system resource or whatever intertie resource was used to declare the array showing on a monthly process. It's transferred to the individual resources for that specific hour, and those individual resources now carry the must offer obligation, and any associated RAM assessments will be on these resources.
Okay, if there are, let's say, 5 weeks, 4 weeks different resources, then you're going to calculate RAM for each resource by week. Is that
So for each day where that resource is been reassigned to, we will calculate the unavailability for that day, and then over the month we will see what the overall, what that resource, whether or not it has made its 95 or 96.5% versus the 94.5%. So it's similar to substitution.
okay? Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mohan.
Okay.
So again, these are the concepts that we're going to want folks to be thinking about when we post revised language for both the intertime modeling and the RA reassignment requirements. Hannah, additional questions?
No questions in the chat and no other hands raised.
Maybe we can return to the process slide deck.
I think you,
I have to
you have to,
stop sharing.
maybe she can take control from you.
Yeah, I think you can take control from me. That may be the best course. And go back to the slide deck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so just to retread this ground, our next step is well, we have some questions I think we are going to run to ground internally, but after that we'll post written responses to stakeholder comments. And I expect that we will post those next week. My hope is that we will, at the same time, post revised tariff language with respect to the intertime modeling issues and also the resource adequacy reassignment rules. I know that folks have questions about those and also the proposed changes to the HASP language that they still want to explore. Our current thinking is that we will share a briefing of the scope of the changes we're making with our governing body for the Western Energy Market and also the ISO board at their December meeting, which is a public discussion. And that as the conversations continue, we will assess whether or not we need another stakeholder meeting to talk about the tariff provisions that we're proposing in January. And still, I think our hope is to get this on file at the end of January. And we'll take, the perspectives that, should we pursue some of the elements and not others, obviously, into consideration, and talk about that internally. With that, Hannah, maybe I'll pass it back to you, unless there are any final questions that we can try to cover now.
Yep, we do have a hand raised from Dan.
So just real quick here. So would the most efficient thing for us as stakeholders right now to do would be to wait to see that revised red line tariff language before commenting any further on like what we understand the direction of the RA changes to be, or the HAS changes? Like, I know there's a comment period open through Friday still on those November 14th meeting discussions, but would it be better to just wait and see kind of what comes out in the red line tariff language and comment on that?
Well, certainly you can do that. I'm not going to say don't comment in response to the November 14th discussions, but I do think it'd be helpful to look at what we put out and have something more concrete to get your head around before providing comments. We'll consider whether or not we need to, schedule another comment date on the revised tariff language. We recognize that we're going into the holiday season, and it might get challenging for some to, get comments written, but we also, we don't want to foreclose any input or perspectives, so we'll consider that as well. But like I said, I wouldn't want to say don't comment on the November 14th, but I think it'd be probably helpful to have the tariff language in front of you, obviously, to get a sense of what we're proposing.
Yeah, I would even be a little stronger and say, please comment on the November 14, because this process is the tariff stakeholder process, focusing on the tariff language to reflect the implementation direction that is being discussed in the other forums or fora, and so yeah, they are happening in parallel and kind of in real time. We get that, everybody, and but yeah, definitely welcome whatever you have to say, but prefer to work on both kind of as coordinated but separate processes.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I guess I should kind of remember that usually tariff clarification process is like, did we get the wording right? And kind of the content and stuff is we're usually discussing in other meetings. So okay, we'll move forward with that. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. And no other hands raised and no questions in the chat, so I think we can go to the next slide. And just a quick announcement here. So please refer to the recurring process webpage for more information. And then if you do have any questions, please contact ISO Stakeholders Affairs at ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. Next slide. And then here's a look at the meetings this week, as well as comment deadlines and no training scheduled this week. Next slide. And then some information regarding the market simulations, and then submitting a CIDI request, and as well as email option there. So next slide. And then lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, please be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog. And then with that, thank you so much for joining today's discussion, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.